Thank you for taking the time to attend this morning's webinar on global HR qualifications. And without further ado, I give you Jana and Jackie.
Thank you, Keith. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about qualifications, but first a quick blurb on RPI. Right now we're about 90 consultants strong across the U.S. We are an Infor Alliance partner, Cloud Suite specialized, and we have a whole bunch of consultants that are certified in their topic of choice.
So talent management. The system's referred to as a talent management suite, and we thought we'd take a step back for a minute and understand what that really was. According to Wikipedia, talent management is the anticipation of required human capital for an organization and the planning to meet those needs. The term was first used by McKinsey & Company back in 1997, coming off of a study that they had done. In '98, it was first used in a formal paper in a professional journal, and by 2001, McKinsey & Company published their book based on their study called The War for Talent. And you started seeing that headline in all sorts of HR journals, War for Talent. That's kind of the beginning of the Infor GHR system. The thought process was, wow, we've got a whole new way of managing talent that we want to put together here, and we want a system that isn't just focused on financial processes and transactional items, but can actually help manage that. So in 2009 to 2011, you saw McKinsey & Company, the New Talent Management Network doing an additional series of surveys where they identified the major areas that talent management takes place in, and they came up with succession planning, performance assessment, development, and high potential management as the primary talent management activities, but performance management and talent acquisition are also areas of talent management. And so what you're seeing with the system is that at its core, there's an ability to manage talent through all these different modules, and that's what we're going to talk to you about today.
And the way that you can manage it is through qualifications. So a qualification is an accomplishment or a skill or an ability that makes someone suitable for a job or activity. And these are the different types of qualifications that are provided within the Infor Talent Management Suite. We're going to get into a definition about each of these as we go through.
So this is something at the core that's then, all these modules are integrated and can access this functionality at the core of the system. So you're going to see them pull into performance and goals. You're going to see them used and attached to jobs and positions. You're going to see them used in talent acquisition for recruiting. We'll talk a little bit about how they can really help you in your succession planning. And finally, learning and development have some aspects as well. This is a whole new way of managing people, where at its core, you're assessing a competency and using that to get a more exact match for your hiring, to help people build development plans, to make them a better candidate for their own job, as well as looking ahead to a job they might want to be a successor for.
First, we're going to talk about competencies. Now, this area of global HR, actually the whole thing used to be called competencies. They renamed it to qualifications to be a little bit more encompassing of all the different types of qualifications you can have. So a competency is actually a subset of one of these qualifications. It's kind of an underlying personal characteristic or ability, kind of a soft skill, something that you might not get renewed or might not be certified in, something that's a little bit more intangible. Oh, thank you. For our definition down here, yeah.
Sorry.
Largely blocking.
And we have an example screenshot of a competency here. We have communication as an example. You have a bunch of different fields, a lot more than you have in S3 if you're used to S3. A bunch of different fields to describe a competency. You have your code, short description, long description, and then a large box for a summary. So you can really describe what exactly you're looking for this competency. And just to give you an idea, Jana's going to break down a competency a little bit more for us, but just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So we have qualifications at the header, and then competencies as one of the types. Beneath that, you can have different subtypes of competencies, and maybe that's a skill, a knowledge, an ability, or some other kind of intangible attribute that a person can have.
So with the competency, there are two ways you can describe it. If your competency is going to be rated, the system flips to this proficiency tab, which allows you to define rating level by rating level what the competency looks like at that level. This can be super helpful for managers as they're trying to evaluate their employees and figure out, are they a 3 or a 4? They can read between this. If you're not implementing this for performance management and you're just using the competencies more generally, this title flips to behaviors, and you can put in several key behaviors that would identify that this is a competency that person is exhibiting in their work performance.
And in addition to all the detail you have on the main detail tab and that proficiencies or behaviors tab, there's also kind of a catch-all tab for attributes. Again, you have your short description, your longer description, and your big summary here. And this is just kind of a catch-all place where you can put additional information you might need to put for a competency.
So the competencies also will tell you which jobs and positions they're used in, which can be super helpful. This is a list definition that you can modify to exactly match reporting needs that you have. So if you need a list of, okay, well, which positions use this competency, you can build this out to have all the data elements you need and then just export it easily to Excel. Similarly, the system also helps you tie in what resources have that competency, as well as the rating level that they've been given. So if you need a quick dump of, well, shoot, who else has this competency? We need to pull them in on a project, or we need some additional people for a succession pool. This list, again, can be modified to have whatever data elements you want and dumped out to meet your reporting needs.
These two tabs are part of my favorite things about the whole qualifications module. It's a quick, easy report for you to be able to pull in.
So this is the screen that appears when you try to add a competency to a resources profile. And so you can see some of the elements we were earlier pulling in the title. There's also free-form text fields here that you can use, both for the competency as well as for other qualification sources, and the rating level if this is a rated competency that you're doing. You can.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
Okay. So competencies actually get pulled into two bigger containers. This is a little graphic here to try to provide an example, but we have competencies at the lower section here, and we have two examples of communication and problem solving. You can then group competencies into competency groups, which are larger groups that can maintain multiple competencies. You wouldn't want to duplicate a competency into two different competency groups because you'll get errors when you try to add the same competency group to the same competency model or person. But then you would then take your competency groups and attach those to competency models. So it's kind of, one of like those nesting dolls you stack on top of each other, and you can either tie a competency, a group, or a model to a person or a job or position. And when you're using performance and goal, or just performance, you need your competency models built out because that's what actually gets tied to the performance appraisal.
And this gives you a certain amount of efficiency in your setup. So say you've got a core group of nurses, but you have different levels of nurses, or some nurses are supervisors and some aren't. You can have a competency group of nursing that you can attach to every nursing job code, and then maybe you've got a subset or an additional set of competencies, another group for ER. Right. Emergency room competencies that they need to have, or med surg or something like that. And so you can use them as kind of building blocks instead of having to re-enter each competency for each job code. So this is just another view of the competency model, kind of on the back end, that you can see you've got individual ones here tied to groups that are then tied to models to give you that efficiency.
And so that was the top level, the model, and then the next level down is a group. So here's just another example. Here's the specific group we have. This one is called accountability, and then we have a bunch of competencies tied to that are accountability 1, accountability 2. So you can use different naming conventions. If you want to have like a nurse, you can have nurse 1, nurse 2, and then use the long description to actually contain the information that they need to have. Pretty much up to you how you want to create these relationships.
Mm-hmm. Qualification categories is just another data element the system gives you. They're completely optional, but they can help you categorize things for reporting purposes. Similar to the ones you see listed here, other typical qualification categories are knowledge, skills, attributes, and behaviors.
A qualification source is where or how a qualification is acquired. So it could be a skill, it could be a certification, which we're going to get into a little bit, but it's typically an organization or some education institution where you can be certified or acquire a certain qualification. Again, just for reporting purposes, really, if you wanted to group things together, you would define these and attach them to the qualification.
Mm-hmm. So skills. Skills are different from competencies in that they are a learned ability that you need to perform your job effectively. It's something that can be tested and measured objectively, And if a skill's not used often enough, it could become obsolete or it could need to be renewed to get your skill up to date. So kind of typical skill examples that are thrown out are things like Spanish, speaking Spanish, or knowing Java or Excel or the Microsoft Office suite. A lot of organizations don't always differentiate between competencies and skills, but in the system, the main difference is that competencies are not renewable, but skills can be renewable. So you'll see the setup, the fields for them are a little different to accommodate that functionality.
They're definitely different, but they look pretty similar because they're on the same business class. So when you're querying them, the business class is actually competency and skill. So one of the ways to break that out is to maybe use a category to specify that this is a skill versus a competency. But you can see it's kind of similar. There's different rating levels. There's renewal cycle. This gets to Jana's point about it being renewable. But a lot of information that you can track on here, and we're not going to go through each one of these tabs, but again, you can see that there's proficiencies, attributes, you have your used by, and your resources tab as well.
Basically the same as the competencies tabs. Again, an attribute type is just a optional categorization that's in the system for you to use. There's no functionality triggered off of it, but it does help with reporting a lot.
Quick jump away from an actual qualification. We didn't want to leave this out. This is an achievement, so this is still something that can be tied to a resource, but it's not one of those main qualifications. But if you were perhaps published in an article, or you wrote a book, or you received an award, and we wanted to track that in the system, you can define achievements kind of like how you would define a credential or a skill, and then attach it to a person. So this is just an example of someone who published a scientific article. There's comments, you can attach a file, and there's a URL box a little bit lower down that we didn't include on the screenshot as well.
Credentials. Credentials are more formal qualifications that are usually delivered by some sort of accredited institution, such as a college or a licensing institution. So these also can periodically be renewed. Something like an education, a degree is something you have for life. You don't go back and renew those degrees, but the credentials can be used with a renewable cycle to them. So they're used to track any license or certification. If you have drivers, for example, in your organization, and you need to track licensures and expirations of those drivers' licenses, this would be the place. Similarly, your RNs, your registered nurses have licenses that have to be updated on a regular basis. If you're a public school system, your teachers' licenses are updated every now and then. And what's really nice is in taking advantage of these credentials and this renewal process is in a minute we'll talk about some of the automated expiration notifications that you can use to send to people to give them a heads up. Hey, do you know your license is expiring on this date, and remind them of when that's due to be renewed.
Next up, we have education. So within the education qualification, there's 3 different things you would set up. First is education. This is like your degree. What degree did you receive? These are user defined, so you would define these yourself from a high school degree all the way up through higher education. The next is education specialization. So what did you study? What was your major and what was your minor? And again, all user defined, so you would come in here and define these as well. And then lastly, which I see used less often, is education institution. So this, I actually have a list of all of the education institutions in the United States as of maybe 2 years ago, pre-sorted alphabetically. If anybody wants it, I can send it to you. Took a long time to do. But anyway, when you tie this to a person, you can allow them to select an education institution, or right below my example here, there's an open space for them to type in if for some reason their institution is not in the drop-down list. But this is just an example of tying all 3 of those together onto a person. So here's our example person. She received an associate in occupational studies and specialized in nursing. This was the completion date and the education institution as well.
There are pros and cons to the tables versus the free-form text fields. One organization I worked with had 95 degree types because there's so many more specialized degrees these days. There's not just a MS in education, there's a master's in education. That's a degree type in and of itself. Even at the bachelor's level, we're starting to see specialized degrees come out from different schools. That's probably the smallest amount of values you'll have in your table, the degree specialization is becoming monstrous because everybody can make up their own degree these days, and they want to see both history and finance, or both basket weaving and international studies. So it can become quite a chore for somebody to continue to build out these tables as you have new hires come in and have these. But the flip side is, if you have the specified values, then your reporting is always exact. So some people in S3 have had just free-form text fields going into their system for education, and they may have the University of Maryland 4 or 5 different ways. Yeah. And it becomes this effort of dumping the data, sorting, trying to figure out what's the same school, kind of a thing. So just be aware, it can be a lot to maintain, but then it can really serve your purposes better. Email automation. The system delivers email automation throughout the full life cycle of each of these qualifications. So you've got your competencies. If you're going to allow your employees to add the competency, there can be an email to the manager letting them know something's been added. If you've got the manager adding a competency and you want the employee to know about it, you can have emails added. So back and forth throughout the whole process, you can set up and define any number of emails and triggers to send those emails. If you go ahead and click to the next one, the templates allow you not just to hard code in things, but to select variables from the system. So you have the resource email and the manager email, which will just pull directly from the system. You can also pull certain variables into the text of the email as well. And there's these really nice rich formatting functionalities now in all the text fields. So you can put colors, you can do bullets, you can bold, you can make the font bigger, however you think is most helpful for drawing people's attention to the information, and if there's any actions that they need to do off of that trigger. Similarly with the skills, you see emails throughout the whole life cycle of the skill process and any manager and employee interaction, as well as the credentials, as well as education. So the system's really beefed up in the last couple of years, a whole set of around these qualifications that you can take advantage of.
I think we have a question.
Great question here. How much of this is built by HRIS and or entered at hire, and how much can be added by manager or employee self-service?
It depends on what you want to allow the managers and employees to do. So generally, when you're creating the codes, HR does that. They create all the different credential types or competencies, but then you can open it up to your managers and employees to be able to add that themselves. And then if I just back up here to one of our
email templates
examples,
there's
here.
This validation.
Yeah, exactly. So if an employee comes in and adds an education record, we have the manager is able to validate it and then let the employee know that it's been validated, or the administrator is able to validate it so that it doesn't automatically hit their record saying, you know, I have 3 degrees from Harvard. It's going to go through a validation process first to make sure that it's accurate. And the same goes for credentials and skills and competencies as well.
So usually HR, especially when it comes to applicants, will want to maintain some control over these tables, and they'll be involved with a background check process usually that will come back and say, yes, they have the degree, and then they can go ahead and validate it in HR. But some organizations on the larger side do open it up for managers as well.
Yes. And then we have a screenshot coming up about of a candidate, but if a candidate puts these values in on their candidate record, once they're hired, it'll be brought into their resource record as well. And then here is the talent profile. So bringing all of these items together, you can see at the top, we have competencies, credentials, skills, education, and then employment history and achievements. This is all right on the resource profile, right on the talent profile tab. So all of this is together in one place. And like I just mentioned, if you are a candidate first and then get hired into being a resource, all of that will pull right into here.
Jobs and positions. So jobs and positions can have either individual competencies, skills, et cetera, attached to them, or these groups of competencies. So as we said before, you might have a cluster of competencies for a nurse generally, but then a separate cluster for different specializations such as NICU or emergency room, or if the nurse is a manager, there might be a supervisory set of competencies that are pulled in to that particular position as well. So you'll see throughout, you assign things at the job level, they pull up to the position level, but you can also modify at the position level. You can also designate whether a competency or skill is essential or non-essential. And the values as I said, from the job can be overwritten at the position level as well.
And I just want to point out, just to visualize it here, so here's the credentials on the position, and then here's the credentials on the position that came from the job. So it distinguishes between the two places that you can actually add the qualification.
So in talent acquisition, you also see the different qualifications for a applicant, for example. So unfortunately, we didn't have an example with a lot of data in it, but this fit analysis you would see normally on the at a glance in the employee record, but obviously if you're backing up the process into your recruiting, then you're going to want to pull it in here as well. And this brings up another point, that using competencies to manage your talent actually forces you to retrain certain parts of your HR staff to be able to work with this. So if you're going to have a candidate come in and assess that they're an intermediate level project manager, your recruiters are now going to need to be trained to talk with that candidate and assess through a series of questions. Are they really intermediate, or have they really just done one or two projects and they feel like they're intermediate, but we would really put them, at a beginner level. And that helps give you a truer fit analysis for that candidate, which can then bump them up or down in your list of priorities of candidates to talk to for that position. Similarly, you've got fits with skill, with education, or credentials. And the education one, you have to be careful of in terms of knockout questions. Do you really only want people that have a bachelor's? Or if somebody's got 14 years of experience in the field, is that going to be equivalent to you as a bachelor's? So are you going to knock them out just because they don't have a bachelor's, or are you going to be able to assess a larger range of experience for a candidate to still allow them to be a fit for the position?
And this qualifications fit, this is especially helpful in talent acquisition, but when you're looking at it on a resource record, unless you have everything built out and all of your qualifications attached to your employees, it can be a little misleading. So we generally say, unless you have everything built out and ready to go, you probably want to hide this for now because you don't want to get everybody down on their 0% fit. And then once you have everything built out, you can open that back up. Here's an example of performance management using competencies as criteria. So each one of these questions is a competency, and then these are those proficiency ratings that are associated with them.
Succession planning. You want to think with succession planning, not just who is the best widget maker to make them the manager of the widget makers. You want to think through, does this person actually have people skills? And so for succession planning, where this really becomes powerful is helping assess somebody's competencies against the next level set of competencies. And that can help you identify, is this person really a good candidate immediately, 2 to 5 years, 5+ years, as well as help you build their development plan and identify which areas they may need some development. So your learning and development module has a nice feature where you can attach to a particular course a competency and a certain rating level for that competency. And once the course is taken and marked as completed in the system, it will automatically update that employee's record with that competency level, rating level. This is just another example of a little further back in the activities. You've got this outcomes tab. If you're wondering, well, where is that in the system? You can pull up your activities, go to the outcomes tab, and do a create and get that previous screen I showed you.
So some common modifications that we see with qualifications. You often want to change the routing for validation. So maybe you want it to go 2 places before it's confirmed and approved, or maybe you want to take out one of the levels of validation. You can do that. Additional reporting. So there is an expiring credentials report that is available, but if you want to change the format of that or change the threshold, the number of days that you get that report, you can do that as well. Additional notifications. So to send out notifications to people that their credentials are expiring, you can add in additional notifications aside from the ones that are already delivered. Grouping for and/or qualifications. So this is one that I've done in the past where if you could maybe have 20 years of experience or a bachelor's degree, you can put those both on the record, but they would both be non-essential. If you want them on the same record next to each other so that it's an and/or statement, you can attach that second selectable item to that credential or that education level via configuration console to make it kind of an and/or thing. Little bit difficult with reporting because it's still going to be looking for that primary one that you're looking at, but it helps at least visually for a person to be able to select one or the other.